At 8:45 a.m. on the 25th of February 1975, 3 carriages of the Northern City Line tube network were on approach to the final stop of the line at Moorgate tube station. Usual behaviour for the train would indicate a gentle slowing on approach to the station's platform, so that passengers would easily be able to anticipate the stop and quickly get off the train and go about the working day, without much delay or any delay at all. But this wasn't going to be just another train stop. Unlike thousands of other stops that this train and driver combination had done in the past, on approach to the platform, the train driven by Newson failed to slow. In fact, it only seemed to increase in speed to those looking on from the platform, quickly passing through the station at a blistering 30 to 40 miles per hour. And unfortunately for both Newson, the driver, and all 300 passengers on board, just past the station was a sand drag 2 feet tall, and beyond that was a buffer stop. And then, just a wall. By 8:47 a.m, it was all over. The 3 carriages had smashed into the wall, compressing them all together into one continuous metallic mess of wreckage. The weird thing, however, was that when the train passed through the station, just before crashing, witnesses on the station platform noticed nothing seemed to be wrong with the driver. He wasn't incapacitated at all. At least it seemed that way. But if that's the case, then what really did cause one of the strangest train disasters in British history?
Ground in Moorgate, it was an ironically lovely day, made instant nonsense of by the horror which, with the regularity of a procession, came from the station entrance. The rescue workers toiled, working in half-hour shifts, because that was all they could stand in the thin air and the thick dust.
At 8:48 a.m, the initial call to emergency services was made. 6 minutes after this, the London ambulance service had arrived at the scene, and no more than 3 minutes after that, the London Fire Brigade had arrived to aid those that were trapped. Alongside this, their description of the scene that awaited them was harrowing. The front carriage was an indescribable tangle of twisted metal, and in it the living and the dead were heaped together, intertwined among themselves in the wreckage. It was impossible to estimate the number of casualties involved with any degree of accuracy, because the lighting was poor. The victims were all tangled together, and everything was covered with a thick layer of black dust. Many of the victims were writhing in agony and were screaming for individual attention. It was obvious from an early stage that the main problem was the disentanglement of a heap of people, many of whom appeared to be in imminent danger of suffocation. After an initial inspection from the London Fire Brigade at the scene, the crash was immediately upgraded to a major incident, and was to become one of the worst train disasters in British history.
Survivors told extraordinary stories. The response of the public was quite remarkable. Queues at a local blood donors centre formed immediately. They waited even when told the centre had enough blood.
To reach the front coach, and they had to cut through the roof and floors of the other 2 to do so.
When the 3 carriages crashed into the tunnel, it resulted in a concertina effect. The first was basically crushed beyond recognition by the second and third. The usually 16-metre long first carriage was reduced and crushed to a size of just 6 metres, with the driver's cab and the first 15 seats of the first carriage being pushed into a length of only half a metre. One of the passengers on the first carriage, Javier Gonzalez, described the moment of the crash. Just above my newspaper, I saw a lady sitting opposite me, and then the lights went out. I have the image of her face to this day. She died. As darkness came, there was a very loud noise of the crash, metal and glass breaking. No screams, all in a fraction of a second one takes to breathe in. It was all over in no time. And just as the crash had taken almost no time to occur, by 9 a.m. that same day, the last of the casualties from the third carriage were removed. With around 300 people being on the train when it crashed, it meant there was still a large amount of passengers still trapped within a tangled mess of wreckage. And the sad fact being that the majority would have been in the first few carriages, as usually this would provide a speedy exit from the station upon arrival, but this time it just increased their chances of not making it out of the station at all. By 10 a.m, a path had been cut through the carriages in order to better reach those trapped inside, and a medical team had set up a makeshift operating theatre on the platform just beside the crash site. By 12 a.m, incredibly, only 5 passengers were left to be extracted from the metal wreck. As time passed, however, the conditions inside the station and crash site became more and more difficult to operate in. All trains running into Moorgate after the crash had been halted. This seemed obvious, as you can't have trains and passengers running into a crash site. This also had the effect of raising the temperature inside the station, reaching 49 degrees Celsius, and limiting the amount of time rescue personnel could work at the site to only 20 minutes. By 3:15 p.m, only 2 of the 300 passengers were left to be extracted from the wreckage: Margaret Lyes, a 19-year-old police constable, and Jeff Benton, who worked at the London Stock Exchange. By 10 p.m, both had been removed from the wreckage, Margaret Lyles having to have her left foot amputated, and Jeff Benton, although initially recovering well, later succumbed to the effects of crush syndrome. Beyond this, there was a hushed silence on the platform, as one final call was made to see if any other people trapped in the wreckage were alive. When nothing but silence greeted the call, all the other unaccounted for passengers were presumed dead. It had now turned into a recovery operation.
Was brought out on a stretcher. The other person, who is known to be alive but still trapped, is a young man, and there are reports that surgeons are having to operate to free him. The policewoman who'd been trapped 12 hours in the wreckage was Margaret Lyles, who's 19, and joined.
In total, 43 people had died, and 74 were injured, on what they all probably thought was just another routine journey to work. But why did a train that had seemingly done the exact same route thousands of times in the past suddenly become unstoppable and crash into the end of the platform at Moorgate tube station? Roughly a year later, on the 4th of March 1976, the report into the accident was published. The reports of commuters seeing Newson still at the wheel at the front of the train as it flew through the station seemed to be corroborated when X-rays showed that his hand was still on the dead man's handle at the moment of impact. The lack of burns on either him or his clothes indicated that no electrical faults seemed to be present, and as the dead man's handle was still depressed throughout the entirety of the collision, the brakes, that were in perfect working order, were not used at all.
After an enormous amount of work, which included fitting parts of the damaged train onto other trains to see how they responded, they came to the conclusion that there was absolutely nothing to prevent those brakes having been applied. Mind you, there were some red herrings. This is the actual brake lever from train 272. When it was found, it was so bent that it wouldn't actually go on. Could that have been the reason the brakes weren't applied? Well, apparently not. It needed such force to bend it that it must have got like that in the crash. And this...
The blame for the accident lay solely on the driver, Leslie Newson. But if it was Newson's fault, why did he do it? Was it malicious, suicidal, or some other reason? Examinations of Newson's blood found a raised level of alcohol in his system. But when you consider the fact that when a body undergoes decomposition, and Newson being the very last person to be removed from the wreckage that had been sitting at almost 50 degrees for a prolonged period of time, the body begins to produce alcohol all by itself, and this was found to be the reason most likely for the raised level in his blood. This paired with the fact that several of his co-workers found him to be completely normal and sober throughout the working day, only served to put this theory into doubt.
I mean, I stopped and talked to him like as we change ends, and I never noticed anything like that.
Did you at any stage smell alcohol on his breath?
No.
Absolutely not.
No. All I gave him was a cup of tea that morning because he said I felt cold, and I handed him a cup of tea before the fatal trip.
The most likely theory was that he suffered from a form of amnesia, or akinesis with mutism. Basically, the person is unaware of their surroundings or actions, but still seem to outsiders that they're perfectly fine. This would explain why people on the platform noted that Newson seemed to be driving the train as it sped past them and into the much too short tunnel just beyond them. Back in the tunnel, there was still the need to clear away all the wreckage that had cluttered the platform. With all the presumed living passengers removed from the wreckage, it allowed the fire brigade to use flame-cutting equipment to get through the resistant areas that they couldn't reach before. The third carriage, the least damaged, was cut free from the other two and winched down the track at 1 AM on the 1st of March, almost 4 days after the initial crash. However, the use of flame-cutting equipment made it even more difficult to work on the platform, with oxygen levels dropping from 21% to 16%. Workers were limited once again to 20 minutes of actual working time, before they had to leave and recover for at least 40 minutes on the surface above. In the following days, the second carriage was cut away in pieces, and like the third carriage, was winched away. The last passenger was removed from the wreckage at 3:20 PM on the 4th of March, and this only left the driver's body, Newson, still remaining within the wreck. After continuous round-the-clock work, he was finally found in the driver's cab that had been crushed to 15% of its original size. The investigation report described how they found him. His left hand was close to, but not actually on, the driver's brake handle, and his right arm was hanging down to the right of the main controller. His head was to the left of the dead man's handle, which had been forced upwards, beyond its normal travel, and was resting on his right shoulder. Newson's body was removed on the 4th of March 1975 at 8:05 p.m. He was the last. The rest of the wreckage was cleared by 5 a.m. that same day, and control of the tunnel was handed back to London Underground at the same time, and this brought to an end the worst tragedy on the Underground since, well, World War II. Around 1,500 people were involved in one way or another in the rescue attempts to those trapped, a testament to the lengths that people were willing to go to when their fellow man is at risk. My thoughts go out to those that hopped on the train that day. They were expecting it to be a routine journey to work, only to have everything wiped away in a fraction of a second.
The stretchers were conscientiously attended by nurses and doctors with plasma. It took hours to get them out. An ambulance man said, "We're trying to do the whole thing through the hole the size of a child's blackboard." It was 6 hours before they reached the front coach.